Okay, Ed, do you want to introduce?
Sure, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Ed Bixby here with my co-host Gretchen Spletzer, and this is the Global Green Burial Alliance's Forum. So, Gretchen, take it away.
Hi, everyone. This is our March forum, and the topic of this forum is the future of funeral directing. And I like a conversation, so talking about that at the end. So I'm going to introduce our panel, and then I've been thinking about how to begin this conversation all days, and I'm ready, so I'm excited about this. We have a great panel of guests. We have Darien Frederick-Cain. Frederick-Cain is a New York State licensed funeral director and embalmer. Darien is also an assistant professor at SUNY Canton's Funeral Services Administration Program, teaching multiple courses including funeral history, embalming, and funeral directing. Darien holds a Bachelor's of Science in Biology, a Bachelor in Technology in Funeral Services and Administration, and a Master of Science in Management, and is currently working on her doctorate in trauma counseling with a focus on compassion fatigue within funeral service. That's a lot, Darien. That's good stuff, boy. Okay. And then we have Tara York. I told you these are interesting people. Tara York, CFSP, is a first-generation funeral director licensed in Washington, Maine, and New Hampshire. Additionally, she is a certified crematory operator and has also served as a deputy coroner in Illinois and Kentucky. Having served the death care industry in various capacities over the years, including pre-need cemetery sales and anatomical donation tissue procurement, she believes that there's a strong need for education both within the industry and the general public. Having trained in advanced trauma repair, Tara has a special love for everything prep room related. With that said, she really enjoyed learning about and being part of assisting families with various alternative disposition options that are available in Washington state and seeks to help educate those interested in the options available, which we know there's a lot of different options available nowadays. And then we have a Jordan Rose. Jordan Rose is a licensed funeral director, embalmer, and end-of-life doula living in Chicago, Illinois. Jordan is on a mission to put the rights of individuals at the end of their lives into their hands. She is vocal about creating inclusive death practices that hold up marginalized voices. When she is not talking about death and dying, she is playing Dungeons and Dragons and waiting for the warmth in the Windy City. So, and then let's see, let me enter, we have two people waiting here. And is Chad Keefe here? I didn't see him at all. I'm not going to introduce him if he's not here. So I don't think, yeah, I didn't think he would make it. So, so to get started, I just want to say I'm part of several Facebook groups for funeral directors, and in all of them, really, there's a lot of people who get in these groups for support. And I was talking to Ed about some of the, you know, things that I see about how much people really love the job and want to be in it, but then they have a lot of frustrations in the job as well. And Ed felt like we should talk about it and engage with you guys and see, because I think both he and I have also felt some of the same things, in what we do. So I thought to start way back when, in the old days when we used to do burials, somebody would die, the family would swoop in. Normally it would be the women that would take care of the body and prepare it, and the men would get the casket together and load it on the buggy and take it to the cemetery or to the church and then the cemetery. And then the funeral industry happened, and we've been doing that for a long time. And then in the last 10 or so years, there's been social media with a lot of influencers kind of shedding light on, the whole funeral industry and waking up people up to it. There's been a death doula movement. There's been the green burial movement. So I really feel like the whole landscape of how we handle death is in the throes of a lot of change right now. So I thought I saw in Tara's bio that she covers some funeral history. So I thought I'd start with her and have maybe you comment on that a little bit, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I would say that, I started in the industry. It's been about 10 years ago now, and I started off with just pre-need sales for a small rural cemetery in Kentucky. And it wasn't long before I started my internship in the same state. And when I first realized I wanted to be a funeral director, I was a kid. And I based on that traditional funeral service where you would go and there would be the wake for, 4 hours in the evening the night before, and then again the day of the services, and then you'd go typically to church and then burial.
Mhm.
And at the time, there wasn't really much talk about anything else. I knew cremation existed, but it wasn't really as widespread as it is now.
Mhm.
So when I really started getting my feet wet in the industry, I saw that things were changing. And in rural Kentucky, it was still very much traditional. So when I moved to Washington State and they had such a high cremation rate, that was really a wake up call to me as to how things are changing. And then to learn about the various alternative dispositions that are available out there as well, that really opened my eyes even more. So in terms of funeral history, I mean, you're right. It really was a thing where embalming took place for almost every decedent, and they would try their best to have an open casket every time. And it wasn't an abnormal thing for people to come together, and it was truly a gathering above all else. And I think we're seeing more personalization and customizing when it comes to services in terms of celebrations of life and memorials and that kind of thing. But I'm not seeing the same traditions in terms of families really wanting to do those large gatherings. It seems like it's kind of condensed, and if people can't get off work, they're not really making the effort that they used to, or it's not being planned around how so that everybody can be a part of it. So having moved to Maine fairly recently, I'm just now seeing that they're starting to do, or they have been doing here, but it's new to me, where it's, they'll do like a 2 to 4 visitation, and then everyone will leave and come back and do a 6 to 8 so that everybody can be part of it. So
Mhm.
that's been one of the most interesting things for me to see, is just the demographics in terms of variation and how that really does change based on where you're at in the country.
Mhm. That is true. My family ancestry is in Gary, Indiana, and they're all very Lutheran, and it is the traditional open casket burial vault cemetery, big headstone. So a lot of relatives back there. But California is different, everybody's cremating here for the most part, or, seeking out alternative things as well, unless it's a older, real elderly person. Like I just had a great aunt who passed, and she was still in the Lutheran faith. It was in Saratoga, California, and we did the full-on traditional burial. So, I think it's very interesting how also, do any of you find that families are seeking out alternative um, options or wanting to participate more in the process of the burial?
I think that's kind of a hot topic here in New York, because we have legalized natural organic reduction. We were the sixth state, I believe, to do that,
Mhm.
but it's not actually being practiced yet in New York. And there's a lot of things, involving, FTC and legalities of it. And it's a big conversation I have with my students, because I have so many students that come in wanting alternative disposition, sustainable disposition. And I always am asking them, well, what does sustainability mean to you? Because what option is truly sustainable, right? We can make pros and cons for any of these types of disposition, because even with natural organic reduction, we have to build the facilities. It's still going to take some energy. We might have to import some of those wood chips and alfalfa that will actually do this. And so I have that argument with my students because they are going to go on and be able to truly change this green burial movement, I think, with their innovations. But I do, because of that, have a lot more people that ask me about it and ask about these green types of dispositions because they are seeing it in the news and they're seeing it on social media. 4 hours away in Vermont, I have a funeral home that I know that's putting in an alkaline hydrolysis machine. So that is becoming more popular up here as well. That is not in New York either, but I am having more and more people ask. And just like Tara said, just where you are is so different because I practice here in northern New York, which a lot of people think New York City. I am 7 hours above super rural on the Canadian border.
Yeah.
But I did spend 9 months practicing in Georgia and Alabama because my husband's in the Army, and vastly different. So I had like the opposite experience from Tara, where I have a lot of cremation up here and going down there with almost no cremation in rural Georgia and Alabama. So like completely opposite. Up here, you don't see the vault. Down there, they had it on display. So that was completely new to me. And I didn't see, at least in my conversations with them, they didn't have that desire for the sustainable burial like I see up here in New York. But it is a conversation that a lot of people are having, that a lot of my students want and are super interested in right now.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like there's a little bit of a culture shift. Like, I know when I was going to the ICCFA convention and I was cruising around to the different booths and I would, approach one and start talking and the guy would say, "Oh, who are you with?" And I'd be like, "I'm with the Green Burial Council." And he'd be like, "Oh, wow, when I leave the business to my kids, I'll just let them deal with that." Like they just really had no interest in it, So
I have a question for the group that Darien just tickled in my brain. Do you think, there may be no way to measure this. Do you think the people who are interested in something alternative are interested in a lower carbon footprint cost or in longevity that doesn't involve constant maintenance, mowing and cleaning and stuff? Just something that we like to talk about because of the length of our projects. So, anybody?
I think carbon footprint for my students. I think they more think of that carbon footprint leaving less of a lasting impact. I don't think that they necessarily think of things like upkeep. I just don't think that's on their radar
Okay.
when they first come in.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I would say that especially with social media putting things out there is a whole generation that realizes that damage is being done to the planet. So they want to do what they can now to hopefully reverse what has been done. And I also think part of it is actually breaking away from the mold of tradition too.
That's what I was gonna say. I think especially where I've worked in Chicagoland was a very, very, very traditionally Catholic area. So you have like you were saying about the Lutheran area, you do the vault, you do the wake the night before, you do church, and everything is like set in stone. It's almost like going to McDonald's and you order the number one. Like that's it's very everyone does the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, it's no big shock that younger generations tend to be a little less religious and hold to going to church every Sunday. And I think once you break out of that, you start to you want to push back against what the tradition was, either consciously or subconsciously. And I think also, at least millennial generation, maybe the one behind us as well, tend to be more ego conscious just overall. So it's not a surprise to me that bleeds over into funeral options too.
And I'd like to comment to that, Steve. You know, we have a young group here. You ladies are all very young, it appears, and that's great. I'm glad you are because you're the future of what we're doing. But, you
Absolutely.
know, coming from an operator's standpoint, you know, the young generation seems to be really concerned with the environment. The middle-aged person seems to be more concerned with the finances, and the older generation are concerned with creating a beautiful place for their family and loved ones to come visit them. So it's kind of a unique peering of it, and I'm sure that that might be helpful to you. But that's what I've seen with my experience. So coming from all different directions.
Yeah, our basic answer to the whole carbon footprint is we know there's a carbon footprint for cremation. We know there's a carbon footprint for making our modules, but they're engineered to last 500 years and produce 100 to 400 pounds of biomass every year. So, you know, it's a trade-off. Over the long time, you're putting much more back into the environment, but in the front end, yeah, it's definitely loaded.
I mean, you really can't. Oh, go ahead.
Okay.
We use less concrete than a burial vault by far. Just the burial vault by itself is, you know, maybe 2,000 pounds, and our individual memorials are about 750. So even with that, and instead of just sitting in the ground, they're actually producing life in the ocean. So I think it's a way, and you can go visit it. You can go visit it in a beautiful place, you know, because we give GPS coordinates, and you know, if people want to dive or snorkel, you know, depending on the space, it's, you know, in some of our places, it's very easy to do. You know, you can see them from the boat, you know, kind of thing. So,
Hey, do you guys have an underwater webcam? That would be cool.
No, you know,
no, we
take a lot of underwater videos,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it's
But
that
that would be a
connection.
good idea. That would be a good idea. If we could get one that was, you know, battery
Well,
powered die after a while, you have to replace the batteries.
I think
we will do that.
I think
Let's
that might lead us
George
into
had a
another good question. Yeah,
Yeah.
that might lead us to a good question, Steve. Like, so Darien, may I ask, does SUNY Canton's funeral program include eco-friendly funeral services? And if so, how's it being received? So what are you talking about, you know, when you are speaking to the students? Is it all the options or certain options? Like, do you talk about wreath balls?
I have included, so I've included about, you know, we talk about the tree pod art project that's not really real and kind of the misconceptions with that. I do bring in eternal wreaths. That I didn't realize that that's what you were talking about, but I do actually include the internal wreaths. I have showed them the old TED talk on the mushroom death suit, which is also not functioning, but to give them the kind of those ideas of things that have come around. We talk about how there are fully green sustainable cemeteries. I actually show the Green Burial Council website in my classes as well. And then we've talked about hybrid cemeteries and how we might have cemeteries that allow green burial, even if they're not. So I actually, in my area, have a Catholic cemetery that is willing to do a green burial if the family wants. So telling them that even if you don't have that cemetery near you, there might be a place that's willing to accommodate. And I show them Passages International, their website with their biodegradable urns and their caskets. And I've used one of their Himalayan rock salt urns because I did a burial at sea once. And so when we give them those different options, we talk about alkaline hydrolysis, we talk about natural organic reduction, we talk about those quote unquote sustainable embalming fluids using essential oils, using food colorings, things like that. So we do try at Canton to be on the forefront of everything and bring in as much information as we can, even if it's not necessarily in ABFSC curriculum.
That's great. Well, I do have one suggestion for you, though, Darien. Start suggesting them to become members of the Global Green Burial Alliance, and they will receive all kinds of wonderful benefits.
There's one of my students I see on here. I did send out this to our whole program, so I will definitely be sharing more from you guys.
Thank you very much.
Well, I have a comment I want to make that, well, part of the reason, like, I got involved, and part of the reason, like, I imagine a lot of young people are getting them, or anybody gets involved with death work, is because they want to help. You know, they've been inspired or they've been through an experience themselves and they want to get involved and help in some way. And I feel like sometimes like they find out that it's not entirely what they expected, you know, like the hard hours in the middle of the night when somebody calls and they're upset and distressed and you have to deal with that. And I just wonder how like funeral directors now are handling their clients with grief, I guess is my question, because I feel like when families are able to participate a little bit more in the process of their family's burial and stuff, that it helps the grief process. Do you guys see like more interest in families wanting to handle death a little bit more? Because it seems like in the past, death has been a taboo subject. Like people don't want to talk about it. And if they do, it's just like, I'm sorry for your loss and that's it. They don't want to get any deeper. But does it seem like the younger generations are more interested in talking about death and all that comes with it?
Well, I think you are absolutely right about social media having such a huge impact on how we even talk about death. Like, I was never a fan, but the Ask a Mortician series was huge, especially in the earlier 2010s with Caitlin Dowdy. Um, and that was one of the first people that I know of that was speaking very candidly about uh, death and the experiences around it. I don't think, from my perspective, I don't think younger people want to talk about death more, but I think they feel more empowered to. I think I think we're socialized. I grew up in the rural South and you just didn't talk about anything and kept it all inside. But if given the opportunity, I think if it became more culturally accepted, I think they would have expressed grief in a more conducive, healthy way. Um, but yeah, I think social media for one, and even shows like Netflix shows or like 6 Feet Under, like that kind of stuff really opened up the conversation, at least for like my generation
Yeah.
too.
And what about, people who seek out death doula services? I mean, in my mind, those people are also people who want to be more part of, you know, the process of
Yeah.
taking care of their loved one.
It's really interesting because it's like you don't know what you don't know. A lot of people don't know that doulas even exist or what they are, or that it's even an option that they can ask for it. Even when we're talking about burial alternatives, a lot of people just don't know it's an option if it's not given to them from a funeral director. But I think if you when you people are really interested in doula services, especially when you people who are on hospice, on home hospice, and you want to be there and you want to not be in a more medical environment. Like you want to bring the death home and just like be more comfortable there. I think that's really important to people. It's also easier, I think, in a home setting to have children around and not have it be so scary to them. I think sometimes hospitals or doctors and things are really scary. And just show that death is more is natural, and like they seem to be more open to talking about it in a home space where they're more comfortable.
Yeah.
I think there's a stigma around death doulas within funeral service. At least in what I have seen, is that a lot of funeral directors feel that sometimes death doulas overstep the funeral side of things. But I definitely see where there could be a great market, especially if you're in an area that doesn't have a hospice center, or your loved one doesn't qualify necessarily for a hospice type of care, because at least where I am, our hospice facility is amazing, but that's not the case everywhere. So a death doula could definitely provide that type of care and support to the family as well. And so I definitely think there's a market for it. I think it's a little bit slower because of negativity from funeral service professionals who think that
Sure.
people should stay out of funeral service if you're not in it.
Mhm.
And I think that's a problem in funeral service.
Mhm.
As for younger people wanting to step in, I agree with Jordan that a lot more younger people are having conversations. And I have a ton of students that come to the program because of what they've learned on social media, have never been in a funeral home, and just see what people portray on the internet about funeral service and think that's it for them. And then they learn whether it really is or not pretty fast. But in my funeral home, a lot of it really comes down to finances. Honestly, what people choose or how involved they want to be based on what they feel they can afford or what they can afford. And I'm someone that gives a lot of deals because I would rather the family be able to be involved and have that opportunity, but not every funeral home's like that. And I think that hinders things as well.
Yeah, I think there's a wide variety of different kinds of funeral homes and what they're willing to do and not do. And I think actually, I think a lot of that has to do whether they're family owned or corporate owned. So that's a whole nother topic.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it really comes down to, I believe with my families, the death doulas offer a more intimate experience. It's something that they're, in the household, spending time with the family. So,
Yeah.
but, so Tara, I see you're licensed in Washington, Maine, New Hampshire. I mean, that's impressive. I see you present CEU courses. When you're doing that, are any of your courses green services? Are they included in your presentation? And when you're doing your CEUs, are they for like state associations or for the like the ICCFA type organizations that exist?
So actually, I recently started presenting with Continuing Vision based out of New York, actually, with Jeff Holcomb. And my first presentation was based on how we can bridge the gap between medical legal death investigation and funeral services, because they're just like with green services and funeral service, there is that gap that really needs to be bridged because there's so much unknown between the two industries. So, so far, the things that I have spoken about have primarily been in that regard. And then just discussions about more of like advanced trauma repair with embalming, like additional restorative waivers, that kind of thing. But I actually do have one that's going to be coming up that is part of our mentor-mentee program that is going to be talking about alternative dispositions and my time in Washington State. And Maine recently, I don't know how recent it's been, but they have alkaline hydrolysis now too. And I have not seen a single family go that route here yet because there is such a limited bit of information and I'm not seeing the education put out there. I think that right now they're kind of in a battle between keeping things as traditional as possible and dealing with the high cremation rate. And it just seems kind of like a can of worms that they're not willing to open or are just not educated about themselves since it is newer here.
Oh, okay.
And that's in
great.
which state here, where you're saying, which state?
In Maine.
Maine, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, like we're coming back to how different it is in each area of the country. It's so true.
Yeah.
But I also think, in those places where it's really traditional for the traditional burial of viewing embalming vault cemetery, that a lot of those places also, I wonder if they were offered a simple burial of, no embalming, get in the cemetery right away in a simple shroud or pine box. Like if they had that option, would they take it? Because a lot of them probably would lean towards the old timer ways, if they could. unless they're that stuck maybe religiously to stick to the family religious tradition. I don't know. But I just
Well,
think it, go ahead.
yeah, Darian brought up a major point in that, I mean, we're kind of talking in ideals here of what like we would ideally want, but a lot of times it comes down to money and like, you know, you have families that have to do GoFundMe's or whatever. And like, even if they're a very
Yeah.
traditional Catholic family that, you know, normally they would do a $12,000 funeral or whatever, if they don't have the money, then they're gonna do the direct burial or whatever it is. And another thing too, you know, I do, so I run the Future of Funeral Directing as Female group on Facebook. That's so many F's in a row.
Mhm.
And we have about 8,000 female identified funeral directors in that group, funeral directors and students. And, you know, the trend I think is that younger funeral directors tend to be more open to different ideas, alternatives to burial, but we are also not the ones running the funeral homes. So I do think I worked for a family-owned business that was very set in its ways, and there's no freaking way they would try anything besides either cremation or, you know, the full-on service. So I think that's also something that a lot of people run up against is we might have all these great ideas, but we're not the ones holding the checkbook at the end of the day, really. So
Yes, I know, and that is the problem.
yeah.
Because it would be so great if and times are so different for people starting out now than they were 20 or 30 years ago. But like, I can imagine a funeral home now that has an in-house death doula if you want that service. You have your full array of options. If you want to be really involved, you can come in and the director will guide the family through a ritual washing or not. You could have somebody else do it too. Just have everything available for the family because they're so vulnerable and a lot of them know nothing at all about dealing with this. And the funeral directors do. They're the perfect guide, but they also need to be totally up to speed, I think, on what a modern family could want.
Mm,
Right. And a lot of it too comes down to marketing within the funeral home. Some of these changes are so easy to implement and offer, but a lot of funeral directors are okay. I do the same thing with every family. I do the same thing in arrangements. Here is option A, B, C. I know we can't offer packages, but most funeral homes basically offer a package to a family. If do you want burial, do you want cremation? And a lot of them don't have those conversations, even telling families they could be embalmed before cremation. A lot of people don't even know that. So offering these the family options with their loved ones is just a small thing, but takes a lot of effort for some of these funeral homes, especially when you get into funeral homes that are doing 800, 900 calls a year, where they really, it's time, time, time. Not saying that they don't treat every family like they're important, but sometimes if you're doing just that many calls, it's hard to give that more individualized care compared to
Yeah.
my funeral home, which does 80 to 100 calls a year, where I really do have that time with the family. I'm in a small town. I know my family is outside of the funeral home. So I can have those conversations with my families. I can give that individualized care. That's just not the option in some of these places. And that might just be an easy fix with having more communication with these funeral homes. But in some areas, I think it's going to take a while for that change to happen.
Well,
Yeah.
and you know what the key is, Darian, and all the ladies and all the viewers here tonight. It's what we're doing today. It's education. It's people are only afraid of what they don't understand, and it takes the consumer, an educated consumer, to ask for it. And believe me, these guys, if they're only thinking about money, unfortunately for them, as more consumers ask for this option, they're going to have to shift their train of thought and embrace the concept. And I think at that point, that's when you will see radical change. So thank you for all the work you ladies are doing to try to help, educate people, because that's critically important.
Yeah.
I will say that even, when I was in Washington, I was there for 5 years, and 90% of the people who would come in and ask for an alternative disposition, they asked for it. They knew what they wanted. They came in and they said, you know, I've heard about this. This is what I want. And I always thought that that was amazing that they did their own research and came to that determination. And that was probably how I got most of my experience with the facilities that had these disposition types, was by families coming in and saying, this is what I want. Otherwise, I didn't see very often that funeral directors were offering those various services.
Yeah, that's,
You're absolutely right. That's what's changed. You know, that's what's changed in our society, partly due to COVID, thankfully, but unfortunately, you know, a silver lining, people started to look into what they wanted and hence, you know, found people like us.
yeah. Well, plus green burial and alternative dispositions makes a great story for the media. They really like it. They really do.
True.
In the
Yeah.
chat, Kim from the Green Burial Association of Maryland asks what we recommend as ways for their association to begin productive conversations with funeral homes and directors about the natural options in a non-threatening pro-business way. So maybe that's something everyone has some insight on. I mean, I think the first thing in my area, based on my experience, I would say just having a personal conversation with them. Say, hey, is there a way I could come in, or we could grab coffee or whatnot to talk about some of these options? When would work best for you? And start to make those personal connections first, and then say, you know, how could we support you and you support us? And start to make that business connection and grow from there, even if it starts out with pamphlets in the funeral home and then adding signage or more information in their aftercare packets, things like that, just to start to get the word out, and then you build that relationship.
Yeah, and as you were speaking, I was thinking even, you know, maybe gathering a list of local like craftsmen that are making the caskets and urns in Maine, and just say, hey, I wanted to stop by and give you this resource. And if some, you know, if any of your families are looking for sustainable burial, here's some you know, resources for you. You could give them. Because everything a
Absolutely.
family does for their loved one after they die, you know, from picking out the urn or the casket or where they're going to be buried or if they're going to be cremated, is all a really special decision. And a lot of care goes
Yeah.
into that. So, you know,
And I think
local natural resources are great.
absolutely. And I think for the Green Burial Association of Maryland, I think no one wants to make the conversation, let's face it, about money. But unfortunately, a lot of these organizations want to know how they can make money doing it. So what you have to do is kind of go into that conversation saying, you know, giving them the understanding what they're doing, how they're charging for it. They will become naturally, once they experience it, they'll become supporters of it, because that's what normally happens. So my best advice would be create a plan to talk to them about how it will boost their sales, but then also spiritually and things like that, why it's so important for the community.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely agree. Just thinking about the owners that I've worked with, funeral home owners, emphasize the parts that are the easiest to include in what they're already doing, and emphasize like the financial aspect of it as well, which, you know, maybe more so than like give them talking points to give to the families, like educate them enough to where, because I'm sure all of us maybe have been in arrangements where we weren't like confident in like selling quote unquote a new product or something. So give them enough education so that they feel confident in even talking about it. Because if they don't feel confident, they're not even going to bring it up. And yeah, that would be my advice.
Yeah.
Also, don't underestimate your relationship with your local mortuary school. So I looked it up, and the Community College of Baltimore has a program that's accredited with ABFSE. And if you don't already have a connection with them, making that connection, because then those students get those resources when they go into their internships and go into their funeral homes. So if you're able to make that connection with the school, your school will most likely promote that as well
That's
within
a
funeral
great
homes.
idea, Darian. That's almost like
Yeah.
getting it at the root of
Yeah.
education. Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. So
Yeah, but
anybody really could, who's a proponent of, this could put together resources for that area, that state, and bring it to the school and say, hey, here for your sustainable part of your education, here's all the local resources, all the things up to date on what they should know.
yeah,
That's
when
great.
when we exhibit at the trade shows, we have a lot of students who come up and want to know about what we're doing and finding out more information. And as time goes on, seem to become more predominantly women as opposed to men, young women who are getting into the business. It's great to see that movement.
Mhm. I think it's very exciting. I hate to say this, but I'm just gonna be honest with what one of the things I saw on one of the groups was somebody was venting and they said, my boomer boss, blah, 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 blah. And so I, my parents are boomers. I'm in Generation X. I feel like it's very exciting, the young people coming up with the much more open minds that aren't so bogged down with belief systems and things like that, that I think that the way we handle death in the future is going to be a lot better, a better experience. And I think it's going to be more about the experience and feeling good about it than sticking to the tradition. What do you guys think?
Well, I think when I was looking it up last, I think, don't quote me, but I think it was between 70% and 80% of graduates from mortuary programs in 2019 were female.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was about 70% were first generation. So you're right about not having bogged down by quote unquote like traditions or whatever. So
Yeah.
there are a lot of people willing to incorporate new things. I also think there's different things we need to worry about with that. Or maybe worry is not the right word, but women tend to take on more than they tend to take on emotional baggage from people more often. Um, just anecdotally, I graduated 2017 from Worsham, and we did have a lot of women, but we also had a lot of women that were coming as a second career. So these are people with children, with full families, and they are going into these apprentice situations where that may not be friendly to childcare and like all of those sort of things. So there's this whole new set of things to take into consideration when thinking about these new generations, quote unquote, coming up as well. So that's kind of where my head is at a lot is
Yeah, and Jordan, so what about like pay scale? Has pay scale with the new funeral directors, has that gone up at all I mean, is it better than it used to be, or is it really stayed the same?
so I can only speak for Illinois and specifically Chicagoland area.
Mhm.
Um, no, like a student,
Like everything else seems like.
hourly wage is about the same. I know when I was a student, I was paid like $7 an hour or something like that.
Mhm.
Um, where Chicago, the minimum wage is $15 now.
Mhm.
So, you're talking about older women or women with children, or even guys with children too.
Mhm.
Um, it's not a livable wage. A lot of times again, I can only speak for this area. There are a lot of family-owned places or places where, as an apprentice, you're expected to live in the funeral home, and that's not always feasible for people with children or families. And I think it really depends on if it's corporate owned versus family owned. There's very different rules for small businesses versus, corporation type things. So that's another consideration as well.
Yeah.
So
So pay has stayed the same while everything else has gone up, which has made it, really hard for people to stay in the profession.
Yeah,
And
and that's not to say a salary for a funeral director hasn't gone up, because it has, I would assume, across the US. But I think the way that we treat students and apprentices hasn't changed a lot in my experience. So just putting that out there.
Yeah. Well, that was an issue not too long ago. I think the students were striking in the universities, not necessarily for mortuary school, but they were apprenticing and working for the university and getting paid nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a big strike. I think they resolved that, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So, well, does anybody have any questions or anything they want to ask out there in the audience?
Well, touching on that, I call it, and with my students, I call it ethical alignment when you are finding where you're going to work. So, I actually just did a presentation recently at Canton about the second shift that a lot of women have just in general in careers, being, childcare and household duties and whatnot. And so I bring that into my classes when you're finding a funeral home. So I work for a very, very small family-owned funeral home, very small area. So I do not get paid very much in my funeral home, but I have the same values as my boss, where we would rather not get paid and give a family a dignified service than hound them down, especially, infant cases, military cases, because I live right on Fort Drum. So we do service a lot of service members and veterans. And so we will give things for free all the time. And we take that hit. But if I don't have anything going on, I'm not in the funeral home. So we can bring our kids. When I was pregnant, they didn't let me do anything because they did not want any risk. We can go and do appointments. We are all basically a family. Now, do I get all the benefits and the pay? No, but I'm happy in every other aspect, and I get to do what I want, and I am not micromanaged, and I get to make those connections. Now, if you go to the bigger parts in New York, the city, Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse, you can make more than I make at the school as an instructor, as a funeral director. You can make a lot more money, but you are not going to have that flexibility in the funeral home in a lot of those places. You are going to work a standard schedule. You're not going to have as much of that outside work-life balance, but you might need that pay for your family and the benefits. So I tell my students, you have to find the spot that you ethically fit with in all aspects of your life. And you have to choose, what are your non-negotiables?
Yeah.
Certainly. It's about quality of life, and it sounds like they give you a good quality of life. What's interesting about this conversation is, the corporations really aren't, funny enough, doing quite as well as people want to believe they are anymore. A lot of people who are not satisfied with the work conditions, with the pay, with the hours, are going out, and mom and pops are popping up again. So that's very good news. It's empowering people to seize the moment. And when that happens, you'll see a lot more options. So I like that attitude.
I will say that one of the biggest things that I think needs to change is that mindset of I went through it, so you need to as well. The amount of people who have been in the industry and are in management roles or just in a spot where they're involved with hiring. And then we have these apprentices and interns coming in, and they're just being subjected to, for lack of a better word, hell, because it's that mindset of, I went through this, so you're going to too. You're going to never have time off. You're going to answer every call, go on every removal. You're going to do every embalming, even at 3 a.m. when it can wait until we get into the office. It's just the world is changing and there's no leniency in that regard. And it's just one of the things I think is scaring away the younger generation from sticking in this long term. And it's really disheartening to keep seeing people go through mortuary school, have the student loans, go into it, and they're gone within, sometimes before they even finish their apprenticeship. And sometimes it's people don't have the ability to go and move all the way across the country or find a different spot. And that's where we're seeing the staffing issues. And I'm with a firm right now where it is a good place to work. It's family owned, but we're having trouble with keeping staff. And it's not because of them. We're in a rural area. But I mean, it's just some of the places I've worked, it's you guys can't keep staff because of how you're treating people. You're promising apprenticeships, it never happens, or you're giving apprenticeships and they're burning out within a couple months. So that's one of the things I think really, really needs to change.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah,
that's a
I
lot of
think
the complaints I see online is around what you're saying, Tara.
Mhm.
Sorry.
I think no, I was gonna say I really appreciate what Darien said about talking about this kind of stuff with her class, because that's not something that was brought up when I was in school, about kind of finding your fit in your ethical fit in your funeral home as well. And I don't think everyone is always super blunt and honest about how hard an apprenticeship is going to be, or um, like the sacrifices that you quote unquote might have to make. And I think one thing though I want to touch on is when we're talking about like we might do a service for free for like a police officer, or we might work overtime for this thing for a family or whatever. I think a lot of times we do that with the best intentions, and then that leads to burnout. And I think creating boundaries around what you will and will not do is really important as well, because it can be such a slippery slope when you start to take on more and more and more for your employer, and then when you're not receiving the benefit in return, it can lead to severe mental burnout, emotional burnout, compassion burnout, for sure. So
Yeah. And I can see why too, because as you said, women tend to care more. And on that subject, we're going to really care a lot when, when a family is in need. And as an apprentice, you're also wanting to please your employer and do good. And so I could see how that could happen for sure.
Absolutely. Sound advice, Jordan. Gretchen, as we come to the end of the hour, do we have any questions from any of the viewers?
Yeah, we got some questions. So one's from Sylvia. It says, my question is around learning from the COVID pandemic and the preparing for possible future mass casualty events like a future pandemic. If that has shown up in discussions in educational or professional, and how? So have you guys that are educating talked about mass casualty
Yes.
issues?
So I linked in the chat a couple articles. So actually in April of 2020, my boss, the program director for Canton, myself, and a handful of our students in COVID, we went to New York City and we did mortuary relief work. In the course of a month, we coordinated and transported 700 remains out of New York City to Northern New York, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and Vermont. And we coordinated with the funeral homes, we picked them up, we transported them to the crematories, and each one was returned to their family within a week. So over the course of the month, we did that effort, and our students learned a lot from that because they volunteered and were in New York City, and a lot of them stayed in New York City at those funeral homes. Some funeral homes had 50, 60, 70 decedents at one time that we were moving and coordinating. and we did not lose a single person. We had everything documented, and it cost about, I want to say it was about $7 per person that we averaged out cost wise. So out of that effort, that has been included in our curriculum. We talk about that project that we did, and I do an entire unit in my funeral directing class on disaster management. And I also include in that psychological first aid. Psychological first aid is a mental health based stabilization effort that you as a funeral director can get the training for free. And it gives you the tools to go in after a mass casualty event, a disaster event, to help in those initial efforts, like with social workers and counselors and clergy members, to go in and talk to people and give them those immediate resources. So I tell my students all the ways that funeral homes can help in these events, beside just transporting, providing space, providing body bags and whatnot. We can also open our funeral homes for shelter. We often have water and lots of space and chairs. We can help with psychological first aid and some of these sites. We usually have backup communication lines, right? So we can help with communication between checkpoints with volunteers. So I definitely implement that. Everything I implement when I've remade my courses is based on real life stuff, which is why my research is in compassion fatigue, just like you say, Jordan, because burnout is so real. And I think a lot of people see that after COVID, the rise of burnout, especially in funeral service. But that's definitely being integrated. We do a lot of continuing education on that as well.
I really did not know that about burnout being such a big thing. In that, that's really interesting. I'm glad you guys are doing that work because it's important. Okay, we got another question from Daniel. He says, in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area, we have seen the evolution of separate retrieval companies providing services for funeral homes, often due to inadequate staffing at funeral homes. Is this a trend? We have in California, don't we, Ed? Different companies that do.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Especially when it comes to direct cremation, that's becoming very popular. So, Jordan,
I
did you
definitely
have-
want to, yeah, I definitely want to speak on this. So 2020 through 2021, I worked for a removal service. We serviced roughly 350 funeral homes in the Chicagoland area and the collar counties, meaning all the way out towards Iowa and down towards Indiana. And sometimes it is because of inadequate staffing. Other times it's because of those things, like I was saying, of funeral directors are setting more boundaries of, I want nights off or whatever. So they have funeral directors go do their night calls. These third-party companies also often work for the coroner's offices, county coroners. So we did Lake County and McHenry County here in the Chicagoland area, all of their police calls. I mean, in all honesty, a lot of the time it's just ones that funeral directors don't want to do, especially in the middle of COVID. We did, COVID cases, or there's a 400-pound decomp up 5 flights of stairs, like that sort of thing. So there is a rise in them. It often started as ambulance services started doing this, and then it kind of transitioned over to actual licensed funeral directors, because we could actually pick up the bodies from hospitals, or all these things where you actually need your license. And then, like Ed was saying, it's really, it goes hand in hand with direct cremation too, because you could easily just take them straight over to the crematory and stuff too. So it is a trend. I don't know exact numbers on it, but it's definitely there's definitely a rise in those services.
And there's a rise in social, at least on YouTube. How algorithms are of people telling stories about these retrievals and the gore and all of the stuff. I mean, that people are knowing a lot more stuff about things than they used to because of social media. So probably going forward,
Absolutely.
funeral directors are gonna have to answer a lot of questions they never used to have to answer.
Absolutely.
Well, you guys,
Well,
we're at the top of the hour, but because this is the future of funeral directing, I really want to hear what each one of you, well, first I want to thank you guys for coming on and talking about all of this with us. It's been great, but I really want to hear what your vision of like the future of funeral directing looks like. We'll start with Jordan.
Oh, okay. Well, there's that, there's this joke that like funeral directing is always 40 years behind like the current culture or whatever. So, I would like for that to change. I want, I don't want families to think that they have to do a $10,000 funeral if they don't want to. I don't want them to be shamed into doing that. I want them to know all of their options, their green burial, their the coral reefs, the like all of these things that a lot of families have no idea about. I want better education for the public. And I also want more inclusivity both in hiring practices of funeral homes, uh, better education surrounding queer and trans decedents, which is a lot of what I do. And basically giving funeral directors the resources they need to not have burnout and to be able to survive in this industry long term. So,
And to love what they do.
yeah.
That's great, Jordan. How about you, Darien?
I think I want, or the future of funeral directing is, I don't know, it's kind of iffy. It's going to be the rise of technology. And I think we're going to still be in a period of, more and more cremation, disconnect. And then I think we will come full circle as, trends fade and then come back. I do think we will find that connection. And I just hope that our educational programs continue to be realistic and enhance the passion in these students, and that we don't just kill their dreams, but we also foster them in a realistic and healthy way so they know what they're getting into, and they're excited and ready to get into the workplace, and have those skills to avoid things like burnout.
That's great. And how about you, Tara? Thanks.
I would like
Darien.
to see the future of funeral service be a place where there is longevity with the career, where people feel that it's something that is worth their time getting into, and where they can see the progression of just overall what is to come. I would love for families to be educated. I would love for funeral directors to be educated. I would love to see, alternative dispositions be a thing that's offered. But I also would like to see where families are never felt made to have an extravagant funeral if the person was, a simple person and didn't want that. I just would think that the biggest thing is education. I've never had a family be upset that their loved one prearranged. I would love, for the youth to talk about that more. Talking about dispositions are great, but one of the things I would like to see more of is having that conversation out there about death in general, and what would you like for your death so it is a positive experience, hopefully. And how can we ensure that it's not just a positive experience for you, but for your loved ones, so that they aren't left in a position where all of a sudden they're facing a funeral director saying, okay, here's a $12,000 bill.
Yeah.
Grief is not one size fits all, but I do believe that a healthy part of grief is going through the grieving process together as a family, as friends, as, gathering together and being able to share those memories and feel that sadness and go through those stages of grief. So I just would like to see, a world where that is possible, and we can help make it be.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all wonderful sentiments, ladies. All
Yeah,
wonderful.
and it's actually exactly what funeral directors should be able to do freely, is everything you just said, Tara. That was great.
It's been an absolute pleasure, ladies. It really has. The Global Green Burial Alliance really appreciates your participation.
Gretchen, thank you for putting this together. I think it was a wonderful conversation. If any of our viewers have any questions for us after this, certainly just go ahead and send them along to us. We'll be glad to answer them for you.
Yeah, I just wanted to give my thanks also to the board and the presentation. It was really good. And it's one of the reasons I'm a member of this organization. We get a lot of good education here. I encourage everybody to join us.
Thanks.
Yeah. And if any of you guys here on the panel, if you ever need any help with anything from our end, or, reach out and let us know. We're always happy to help. And thank you so much for volunteering to be a part of this. I hope it helps a lot of people. And is it okay if anybody wants to reach out to any of you with questions or anything? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Perfectly fine. I will put my email in the chat for the school, and we will definitely can be in touch with your group, and maybe we can get you guys to do a presentation for us.
Yeah, we would love to.
Absolutely.
And all of your bio and links and stuff will be in the YouTube stuff when this goes on YouTube, and please feel free to share it. And it was great talking to you, and I will see you in the group in cyberspace.
See you, everybody.
Hey.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good
Thank
night.
you.